Hello everyone, I hope you are keeping safe and well. I hope your first week back at homeschooling has gone okay and you've managed to build in a routine and get into the swing of things with that. Today we're going to be looking again at the book of Luke. So last week we thought about how he had carefully investigated Jesus' life, how he'd talked to eyewitnesses, and how he'd arranged his book of evidence in an orderly way. Now, we're going to be looking at the Bible again, so it's really helpful if you have the passage in front of you, and that way you can check and see if you agree with what I'm saying. So, if you haven't got one, pause this video now and go and find one. Great. So as I said, this week we're going to be looking at a passage from Luke, and it's quite an important moment in Jesus' life, and because it's important, people have given it a special name. It's got a special title. It's called the Transfiguration. Now, Transfiguration is a word that we don't use very often. I normally only use it to talk about Harry Potter, or this particular moment. The word transfiguration, what it actually means, is a complete change of form or appearance. But before we go on to that, I've got a question for you. If you could meet any two people from history, other than Jesus, we all know we have to pick Jesus, who would you choose? I actually find this quite a hard question. There are so many people I'd love to meet from history. One of them would have to be J.R.R. Tolkien. He was the author of Lord of the Rings, because I love Lord of the Rings. I've got loads of questions for him about Lord of the Rings. But narrowing it down to a second person I actually found a lot harder. I think I would probably choose Mary Wollstonecraft. She was a writer and philosopher who championed equal education for women, and this was during the late sort of 1700s. I just think she's fascinating. She lived a really interesting life. This is her portrait from the National Portrait Gallery, and you can go and visit that virtually if you so choose. But coming back to that in a minute, let's read the passage together. Here we go. I've got my Bible. So we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 9, verse 28 to 36. Okay. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor talking to Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. I wonder, what questions do you have after reading that passage? What things did you notice? What things are you still wondering about? How did they know it was Moses and Elijah? And what was going through the disciples' minds at that point? So Jesus and 3 of his friends, Peter, James and John, have all headed up a mountain to pray. They're getting away from normal life to spend some time to talk with God. And while they're up in the mountain, Jesus is transfigured. He's changed completely in form and appearance. The passage we just read said that his face changed and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. And as this happens, two people appear beside him and start talking with him. Now, if I had asked someone in Israel in Jesus' time who the two people they would most want to meet from history would be, then the chances are some of those people might have chosen Moses and Elijah. They were both massive figures in Israel's history. Moses had led Israel when God rescued them from slavery in Egypt. He was there when God gave Israel the 10 Commandments. He was a big deal in Bible times. And Elijah was also a big deal in Bible times. He was one of God's messengers to his people. We call them prophets. And he had stood alone, pointing the people to God when they worshipped false idols, and through him God did loads of miracles. And together they represented the law and the prophets, God's instructions and his messages to his people. Together they represented the Old Testament. And here they were talking with the transfigured Jesus. And Luke actually tells us what they were talking about. He says they spoke about his departure, or Exodus, which he was about to bring to fulfillment in Jerusalem. Now, some translations use the word departure, some use the word Exodus, which is probably a slightly closer translation to the original Greek. The meaning's not dissimilar, but you might remember that the book of Exodus is one of the books of the Bible, and it's the book of the Bible which describes how God rescues his people from slavery in Egypt, led by Moses. It's not a coincidence that the word Exodus is used here, when Moses is right there. It's absolutely deliberate, and it's there to make you think of the first Exodus, the first rescue. But Jesus is talking about another Exodus, another rescue. And this time it's going to take place in Jerusalem. Last time, God had been the rescuer, and this time was going to be no different. In this moment, when Jesus was transfigured, his friends saw a glimpse of his divine nature, a glimpse of his godly glory. That's why he goes all glowy. They saw him every day. They saw him in all of his humanness. But here, they get a chance to see something of his godness. God was going to rescue his people, and he had become human to do it. You see, Jesus is fully God and fully human. And that's a really tough idea to get your head around. It doesn't seem to quite compute for a lot of people. But because he was both, he could be the one to rescue us. This time not from Egypt, but from sin. The things we do wrong, the things that separate us from God. And that's one of the reasons that Moses and Elijah were there. This rescue that Jesus was about to do, this new Exodus, was the solution to the problem of sin that no one could escape, not even Moses or Elijah. The story of the Old Testament tells us that we need a rescuer. And we need that rescuer to be both God and human. So what is the point to this story? Why is this included in Luke's account of Jesus' life? I think there are possibly two main things for us to take away here. If you notice something else, then great, but these are the two that I've seen. The first is that Jesus is our rescuer. He is the one who saves us from our sin, and that's what we celebrate at Easter. If you look into the description below, you will find a link to a great song by Rend Collective, and it's called Rescuer. Do check it out. I love it. It's a wonderful song. But it's all about how Jesus is our rescuer. And the second thing I think there is to take away, which we haven't really touched on, is that we should listen to Jesus' words. Do you remember in that passage there is a voice that comes from a cloud, and it's all a bit weird and what's going on? Well, all throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, God appears to people in the form of a cloud. And we know that this is God. He calls Jesus my son. But he gives the disciples an instruction. And that instruction is this. He says, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." So I really want to encourage you this week to listen to the voice of Jesus. Last week I suggested you started reading through the book of Luke. Well, this week I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. If you started last week, great, keep going. If you didn't, now is a great opportunity to start. Listen to what Jesus says. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week. Bye.